Before we get started, our drink sponsor, Kirin, have kindly donated a crate of beer to one lucky ticket holder. The seat number that was selected celebrates the second extended edition of the festival. So if you're in seat J2, yes, congratulations. You've won yourself a crate of beer. So make yourself known to one of the JAEFF volunteers, take your ticket, and we'll get that sent out to you. But for the rest of us, don't worry, there will be a drinks reception afterwards where we'll have sake and the sounds of Howard Williams from NTS Radio. So do join us for that.
Yeah, I think ticket J3 might be lucky next year, judging by that retro. Anyway, so thank you once again to our sponsors, the Japan Foundation, to our financial backers, the Japan Society, the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation, and Film London. I do ask for the last time this weekend that you fill in those feedback forms that will allow us to keep getting funded and to improve the festival as well. So the deal is you give us some feedback and we give you some delicious free sake. It's not so bad. So I'm very happy to pass over, freshly baked from the oven of this afternoon's panel discussion. Isolde Standish is here to introduce tonight's screenings. Isolde is emeritus reader in film and media at SOAS, and she is fittingly also writing a book-length study on Nagisa Oshima. So Isolde, if you're ready, I will physically pass over the mic.
Okay. Thanks very much for that introduction. So, death by hanging. I thought it might be helpful in this introduction to set out some of the contextual issues around the film and thus avoid any chance of spoilers. The film Death by Hanging takes up two very contentious issues, both of which are just as relevant today as they were in 1968 when the film was first screened. And they are first, issues around the abolition of the death penalty, and secondly, the plight of Koreans living in Japan. In the 1960s, many countries began the process of banning capital punishment, and Japan, not to be left behind, carried out a survey in 1967 on Japanese attitudes to the death penalty, which found that 71% were in favour and only 60% opposed, with 13% don't knows. These statistics then are the starting point of the film, in which the director, Oshima Nagisa, confronts the 71% in favour of maintaining capital punishment. In relation to the second theme, the plight of Koreans living in Japan, the historical legacies of imperialism should be borne in mind. In the early 1900s, Japan effectively annexed Korea into its newfound empire, becoming a so-called protectorate in 1905. And by the end of the Second World War, more than 2 million Koreans had been conscripted as labourers and transported to Japan. While some opted to return to Korea, others chose to remain in Japan, becoming, in effect, an underclass. The main character in Death by Hanging, a second-generation Korean youth, simply known as R, is presumably the offspring of such a family. The events perpetrated by the character R are based on an actual case of a Korean youth who murdered and molested 2 Japanese schoolgirls in 1958. He was subsequently hung in 1962. His case was taken up by the Japanese media as he corresponded with journalists. These letters were eventually published in Japan in a collected volume under the title Crime, Death and Love. The book became a bestseller. As an articulate boy with a good academic record, he did not fit the stereotypical image of a criminal spawned from the impoverished Korean family. He thus not only challenged racist images, but opened up a debate in Japanese society on the nature of guilt and remorse. The Japanese film critic Sato Tadao, writing in 1968, quotes from one of his published letters. This is the quotation. "I was involved in 2 incidents. If I had not been arrested and given the opportunity, I would certainly have killed again. Since I was arrested, I have shown no remorse. Rather, I have behaved cheerfully. This is not in the least affected. It is natural. If you ask why, it is because I feel no remorse for my crimes. I feel no remorse for having killed people. Even after being arrested, if I was to be released into society, I feel I would probably kill again. First, regarding my killing people, I feel no emotion. This disposition, even at this point in time, has remained unchanged within me. When I consider the act of killing someone rationally, not emotionally, I am the same as before. I feel I have the same disposition and could easily kill again. It is this state, the state of no conscious sense of guilt, that the film explores through the farcical improvised reenactments carried out by the prison authorities in their attempts to restore the prisoner's memory after a failed attempt at execution. There are 2 points to note here. First, that a criminal's understanding and acceptance of their guilt is central to the Japanese criminal justice system, which maintains its exceptionally high conviction rates based primarily on confessions extracted by the police. The other point is that in this case, the youth was executed with unusual haste, only 4 years after he had committed his crimes. If one thinks of the more recent example, in which the Aum Shinrikyo religious cult perpetrators of the chemical sarin attack on the Tokyo Underground in March 1995 have only recently been executed after more than 20 years on death row, we can see that this Korean youth was indeed executed with undue haste. The reason for this, I would suggest, is precisely that through his writings and the publicity surrounding them, his very existence and his attitude to guilt confronted and challenged Japanese understandings of criminality. And it is precisely this theme that Oshima links to the position of Koreans as second-class citizens living in Japan through this Brechtian farce. Furthermore, the film juxtaposes this notion of guilt in terms of criminality with the state's authorization of acts of killing through both capital punishment and war. Having visited South Korea in the early 1960s, Oshima had already taken up political issues around the status of Japanese Koreans in the documentary Forgotten Soldiers from 1963. These were Korean nationals who, under Japanese colonial rule, had been conscripted into the Japanese army as labourers during World War II and had been wounded. Upon returning to Japan after Korea's liberation in 1945, they found themselves unable to claim service pensions, as the Japanese state refused to recognize their status, arguing that they were no longer Japanese nationals, but Koreans, and therefore the responsibility of the Korean government. Thus many became beggars, distinctive in their white military hospital gowns, visible outside major department stores in and around Japan until the early 1990s, by which time I suppose most of them had died off. Japanese elites have constantly, throughout the post-war period, attempted to expunge from the historical record any notion of wartime guilt for atrocities carried out against Koreans, and indeed other Asians, perpetrated during the colonial eras and World War II. However, independent filmmakers, going back to directors such as Oshima, Nagisa and Imamura Shohei, just to name two, have continued to keep these issues in the public sphere, both as documentary and, as in the example of Death by Hanging, the fiction film based on an actual incident. The short film accompanying this screening, The Education System of an Empire, is a more recent example of this tradition in its attempts to keep these issues in the public realm. So I hope you enjoy the film. I think you realize it's fascinating in the way it kind of uses black comedy to make these very significant political points. So thank you very much.